Ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
On today's Prophecy in the News, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 21. For the first time in the history of the human race, we have now, shall we say, completed the very process of time itself. We now enter into eternity. When verse 1 says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. Gary Stearman is here to discuss with me all things new.
J.R., it's a fact in advertising in the 21st century. If you want to sell something, you say, all new, beautiful new, wonderful new, all new for 2004, all new for 2005, whatever. If you call it new, it's going to sell. Because everybody wants something new. Well, here in the 21st chapter of Revelation, we come upon newness in a way that you don't encounter it anywhere else in life, in this life or the life to come.
In the opening two chapters of the Bible, we have the 6 days of creation and the seventh day wherein God rested. Now, opposite of that, over in the last two chapters of the Bible, we have God getting up and creating again. His rest is over.
Yes.
And so what we saw with God's rest back then, the Sabbath is past, the seventh day is over. God gets up and off of his resting and he begins to work again. And it says, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as the bride adorned for her husband. There's 7 new things here, Gary. 7 new things are actually either spoken of or alluded to in these two chapters. There's a new heaven and a new earth and a new people and a new Jerusalem and a new temple and a new light and a new paradise. 7 new things in these chapters.
Oh, it's remarkable. The thing that amazes me, J.R., for dispensationalists, those who believe that starting with the dispensation of innocence and going on through the church age and then into the 7th dispensation, which is the kingdom, we're now into a new dispensation, number 8. And you know, the number 8, J.R., is the beginning of a new order. It's said to be the symbol of superabundance, wealth, prosperity, blessing, everything good you can think about. And now we're into a new dispensation, if you will, and it's marked by newness. And beginning with a new heaven and a new earth, which is beyond my wildest imagining. I can't imagine what a new heaven and a new earth look like.
Yes.
And then the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. There's no more sea. So many things to reflect upon here. If you don't have a sea, you know, you've got a lot more room for people to live, for one thing.
Yes, the Mars rover has gone to a planet that used to have seas and now has no more seas, but we don't think of that as heaven. We think of that as a catastrophe.
Right.
So here we have a new heaven and a new earth, but no sea. What does that say?
I suspect that as in the days of Adam, the earth was watered by a mist. I think there will be a hydrated creation, but that which is ocean now will all be land mass. We'll be able to walk on the surface of the whole earth, which, think of the additional room, you know. 8 or 9 times as much total surface area as we have now.
Indeed. Now there are 27 verses in this chapter, and they are alphabetic. There are 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet plus 5 final forms, which make a total of 27 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. The fascinating thing about this is, Gary, is that there are 2 chapters in the book of Revelation that are alphabetic, chapter 3 and chapter 21. Chapter 3 only has 22 verses. Chapter 21 has all 27 verses, because the last 5 verses and the last 5 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, that is the final forms, are prophecies. And this says that those prophecies are now fulfilled.
And this beautiful place, by the way, that we're going to be talking about, the new heavens, the new earth, the regenerated earth, is marked by something else that people have talked about and talked about and talked about. Verse 2, and I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And when you read about the New Jerusalem, your mind just absolutely, it's overwhelming. Yes. And yet, this is the place that even Abraham looked for. You know, Abraham's the father of our faith. He lived 2,000 years before Christ, 4,000 years before our present day, basically, and he looked for this city. J.R., do you think he had a vision of it? Do you think the Lord showed him what it was like?
Gary, it's entirely possible that he had seen the city. You know, from Adam to Noah, God came down and visited with men. Mm-hmm. It's in my thinking now, it's entirely possible that God came down and orbited the earth in this city of peace. Mm-hmm. It's, to me, let's take, for example, the pyramids around the world. Mm-hmm. They were all designed with something singular in mind. They were all pyramids.
Yes.
And yet they are scattered all over the world. Early mankind did not have the ability at that time for communications or architectural engineers to go to this place and that place, another place, and oversee the engineering of these things. It's entirely possible that orbiting the earth at one time was this house of God. You know, Jesus said in John 14, in my Father's house are many mansions, which indicates to me, Gary, that the New Jerusalem existed back then. Now, the reason I think it's called new here is because it rolls off the assembly line here. It's finally finished. But I think it's been in the making ever since Adam.
Now, is the New Jerusalem our home? For example, in John 14, 1 through 3, Jesus talked about to the disciples about going away, and he's preparing a place for us.
Yes.
And in my Father's house, he said, are many mansions. Would this be that place?
I think so. I think the Lord is preparing for us a place in the Father's house. And I think this is the Father's house. So that means then that way back in ages past, before the flood, early mankind may have been able to look up and see this thing orbiting somewhere between the earth and the moon, orbiting the earth in space, and saw that it was a pyramid, pyramidal shape, and from that came all of these pyramids around the world.
And by the way,
the construction histories of all the pyramids are veiled in the ancient past. There's nothing written about how they got where they are.
And I was going to say, and though men believe they understand how the pyramid was built, the Great Pyramid specifically, in fact, no scheme has ever been derived that would explain how those pyramids were built using technologies we know it today. The biggest pyramid in the world today is in China. It's bigger than the Great Pyramid on the Plateau of Giza. But they're seen also in Central America, South America. They're seen everywhere. Underwater, there are pyramids that were built, obviously, when the land mass was still above water. Off the coast of Japan, there is one. Off of Cuba, they believe they've discovered one. So the pyramid seems to have been modeled after something. And J.R., when we read in Revelation the shape of this thing or the description of it, it looks like it could be a pyramid.
Yes. Well, I don't mean to digress, but I want you to notice the alphabet of the Hebrew alphabet and how it is depicted in each succeeding verse of this chapter. Verse 1, for example, corresponds with the Aleph. The Aleph is the symbol of God's oneness and mastery as seen in the new heaven and new earth. That's the Aleph. The second verse, of course, is a Beit verse. Beit stands for the house, our dwelling place, as seen in the New Jerusalem in verse 2.
Yes, indeed.
So here we have in these two verses the Aleph and the Beit. Later on in this chapter, Jesus says, I'm Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending. Well, Gary, this is a perfect chapter for the Lord to bring up the subject of the first and last letters of the alphabet.
It is indeed. And as you go right through this, the 27 verses of this chapter, you have verse 3, and I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. This is God joining with his people in close relationship. And the third letter of the Hebrew alphabet, Gimel, is the letter of loving kindness and culmination. And boy, if this isn't that, I don't know what is.
It certainly is the culmination of it all.
Yeah.
We get to live with God. Now, Abraham looked for a city whose builder and maker is God. Sounds like he may have seen it at one time, and he went looking for it. So, if it's the New Jerusalem, was it named after the old city of Jerusalem, or was Jerusalem in Israel named after this city? I think Jerusalem was named after heaven myself.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot more. We'll be back in just a moment. We're talking about Revelation chapter 21 and the concept that God will create a new heaven and a new earth. But he goes on to say the first heaven and the first earth were passed away. Now this brings us to the study of laws of thermodynamics and entropy. Will the world run down? Will the old mainspring on the clock fizzle? If God creates a new heaven and a new earth, are they separate from the presently existing one, or do we have a mere renovation here, Gary?
Well, J.R., the heavens and earth, as we understand them as human beings, are physical. We have the Hubble Space Telescope out there in orbit taking pictures of galaxies that are supposedly 15 billion years old. We have just recently seen the news item about galaxies colliding. There is a very clear picture taken by the Hubble telescope of two galaxies absolutely ramming each other and disintegrating into smithereens. In other words, that would be a horror, a catastrophic situation. Put in simpler terms, the universe appears to be running down. Collisions, the second law of thermodynamics, which is the law of the dissipation of energy, says that without energy input into a system, the system will gradually degenerate into nothing. And yet the Bible doesn't say that at all. It says that in fact, in reading in Psalm 102:25, of old thou hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment. As a vesture shalt thou change them, and they shall be changed. So, yes, they're wearing out right now, but at some future point they will be changed, which then will make them something that they are not now.
You know, the scriptures tell us that God created things out of nothing. If so, then, for example, today, when energy is generated, something else has to be degenerated.
Right.
And so to light a fire, the match has to burn into cinders. So it's destroyed as something else is created out of it. But not so in the beginning. Therefore, when God recreates the heavens and the earth, makes new heavens and new earth, wherein dwelleth righteousness, there will be no entropy, because entropy speaks and smacks of sin, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and in fact that brings up a good point. In this universe, this is a self-consuming universe, and that includes man. Man cannot live forever. The stars are constantly burning up their fuel. Apparently God is going to create a universe in which his light, whatever that is, and we don't understand it, we know that he possesses the primeval light, the endless, inexhaustible supply of energy. And when he recreates the universe, it's going to operate on that basis, not on the set of laws that now govern things.
You know, John's message here was direct from God, but Isaiah also had the same message. In chapter 65, verses 17 and 18 of Isaiah, Isaiah writes, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, for the former shall not be remembered nor come to mind. But be ye glad and rejoice forever in that which I create. For behold, I create Jerusalem a rejoicing and her people a joy." So the hand of God will recreate a new heaven and a new earth and the holy city, New Jerusalem. Now, my thinking is the new heavens and the new earth are going to be a renovation of the old, because I think the New Jerusalem is a renovation or a continual building of the house of God, my Father's house, which I think could be seen by Adam.
Absolutely.
Okay? And when Abraham went looking for that city, I think that that city existed.
And by the way, Enoch walked with God, and after a while, God took him, just took him to be with him, which means that Enoch must have had conversations with God and understood the things we're talking about on a first-hand conversational basis. And no doubt Enoch transmitted this to his brethren who were alive in that day. Let's face it, if you're going to be talking with God, you're going to be coming back and saying, I talked with God today, and here's what he said, and I'm sure he was listened to.
Now, if the earth is going to be evaporated, you know, as Peter suggested, the elements shall melt with fervent heat. And if this universe is completely done away with and a totally new universe is created, what are you going to do with Psalm 78:69, which says, and he built his sanctuary like high palaces, like the earth, which he hath established forever.
Wow.
So we know that the earth is going to be forever.
We do indeed. You know, it's fascinating, but the Bible speaks of two things. It speaks of the heavens passing away. Peter talked about it. Isaiah mentioned that the heavens would dissipate like smoke. So there's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that the heavens will continue on forever in the power of God. Therefore, there's got to be some kind of a massive change taking place.
Yeah. Now we've got a verse like Psalm 104 and verse 5, which says, who laid the foundations of the earth, that it should not be removed forever. And Psalm 78:69 says, he built a sanctuary. Well, I read that a few moments ago. Ecclesiastes 1:14 says, one generation passeth away, another generation cometh, but the earth abideth forever. And then there's Isaiah 51:6. It says, lift up your eyes to the heavens and look upon the earth beneath, for the heavens shall vanish away like a smoke, and the earth shall wax old like a garment, and they that dwell therein shall die in like manner, but my salvation shall be forever, and my righteousness shall not be abolished. And so we've got verses that sound like the earth's going to be destroyed, and verses that says it's going to last forever. Listen to this one, Isaiah 66:22. For as the new heavens and new earth which I make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. And then there's Zephaniah 3:8. Therefore wait ye upon me, saith the Lord, until the day that I arise up to the prey. For my determination is to gather the nations. I'll assemble the kingdoms, pour out them my indignation, even all my fierce anger, for all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. And so, Gary, even as Matthew 24:35 says, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. How can we think other than the earth will be renovated, but will remain?
And it would seem to be the case. So we don't have much information about it, except to say that he said he was going to make all things new. That's the theme of chapter 21 in Revelation. And to make something new in the sense of the physical universe means to take the components that are there and sort of use them, shall we say, in a way that they are brand new.
Now, you know, there are suns out there that are expected to burn out.
Yes.
Okay? How can that star remain and never burn out? My thinking is he will replace that energy with the original energy source from which it is derived, that is the primeval light. All God has to do is to flood this universe with the primeval light, which is a generating source from nothing. It just is an eternal source that never runs down, and voila, we've got a whole new concept here.
A whole new concept that is tied, by the way, to his people. We can't divorce any of this from the people of God, because the end of this whole story is that God forms a beautiful, close relationship with his people forevermore after this. And JR, by the way, I agree. That light of God and God's order can reverse entropy. That is to say, the universe is running down, things are colliding with each other, the planets are scarred. The Lord's creativity can reverse all of that, and then replace the present energy source with one that does not run down. And for him, that would be nothing.
And that would make all things new.
It would indeed.
That would make a new heaven and a new earth. And of course, now the holy city, New Jerusalem, is described in this incredible verse. Understand that this is the 21st chapter of the book of Revelation out of 22 chapters, and each of them are alphabetic. So this chapter deals with the 21st letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the Shin. And Shin is seen in two forms: El Shaddai, God Almighty, and Shalom, peace. And of course, the very name Jerusalem is City of Shalom, City of Peace. And we can see even the very term God Almighty is used here in this 21st chapter. And if we had a Hebrew rendering here, we would see the El Shaddai, biggest life. So we've got an incredible chapter here, which obviously will require at least one more program to study. We'll be back in just a moment.